because our project actually doesn't need all that water. The project is fine with the pipe the way it is. Costs are high. For only 6 units, it's $30,000. We'll simply add another $5,000 directly to the cost of each unit. We're trying to keep them as affordable as possible. Everything's getting more and more expensive. We don't want to make them so expensive that people can't afford to buy them. So that's our concern.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if his mic is actually on.
Oh,
it is?
Hear any of that?
Well, we heard it. It just seemed kind of quiet. So, thank you. Okay. Do we have any questions then for the applicant? I don't see any at this time, but just have a seat. Do we have questions for our staff? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Staff had referred to the costs of the off-site being less because the road was being dug up anyways. Do we know how much less? Could there be an estimate given for that?
Development Services or Director of Engineering?
We don't know the exact amount, what that would be. In the cost estimate, it does have a breakdown. I'll just refer to that. Yeah, it's indicating that the road works. Actually, the cost estimate just speaks to the road works for the replacement of the water main. So I'm not sure what the other breakdown would be.
Yeah, when I look at that estimate, like the roadwork piece is $10,000 for the waterworks or for the earthwork. So I wondered, is it reasonable to say, gee, we could take $10,000 off of that estimated amount because you wouldn't have to do those roadworks because you're doing them to replace the road anyways? Is that a reasonable assumption or not?
Your Worship, that's a reasonable assumption, but without the other costing, I'm not sure.
I understand. Another question about how this would work is if we didn't pass the motion and the developers had to pay the $31,000 and then it costs less than $31,000 to do the works, what happens?
Your Worship, typically this work would be done under a charge out, and the money would be put in trust and hold until the project was complete, and then any monies that weren't used would be returned to the developer. So if the project came in under budget, that money would be returned.
Okay, I understand. Okay, those are all the questions for staff. I do have one question for Mr. Hermansky later.
Okay. Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. So the decision to upgrade the main is based on what the property could have been zoned for, not necessarily what it is being used for. Is that fair to say?
Your Worship, a 200 millimeter PVC water main is the standard of today for a high density area. And Mr. Hermansky mentioned that the development will not be built out to a high density. The surrounding neighborhood is designated for high density, and 200 millimeters is also the standard for a medium density neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for staff? Councillor Harrison?
I have one other, Your Worship, I just want to get clarification on. I think in the report, unless I've misread it, that it says even under the medium density residential designation, your required minimum is 150 millimeter diameter. So is the diameter of the pipe for high density 200 and for medium 150 and for R1 100? Do I understand that correctly?
Your Worship, R1 is 150. The minimum standard for the pipe is 150 millimeters. This one is undersized. It's at a 4-inch, 100 mils. So medium density would be 200 and higher density would be 200 as well, which is 8-inch.
Okay, so there's not a difference between high density and medium density?
No, Your Worship.
Okay.
Thank you. So did we have any further questions? And sorry, you have to. You wish to talk to
Thank you, Your Worship. The previous bylaw is also referred to here. So it's under the previous bylaw, a 50% cash contribution would have been acceptable. Is that correct?
That's correct. With the change of the new bylaw, it requires that the 100% contribution be put towards the development.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Hermansky a question, unless
Certainly.
someone else wants to ask staff a question?
Yeah.
Just like last night. Barrett, I wonder if there's any consideration or if there's any discussion about a partial payment rather than the full 31,000, and how would developers feel about that?
I guess it depends on how partial. But yeah, I think it's I guess it's something we would be happy to discuss. I mean, I guess when, you know, the fact that it changed very recently, probably since we bought this property from 50% to 100%, that's already, you know, that's a big change right there. And then the fact that our project doesn't actually need the upgrade, and as far as returning any unused funds in the future, you know, this is just cash we're talking about that will go into the city coffers. We don't know if that future is 1 year or 100 years away. We likely wouldn't see any refund. I guess the 50% used to be based on the fact that we're only on one side of the street, and this pipe could serve someone on the other side of the street sometime in the near or distant future. So 50% seemed like a fair contribution. To now go to 100%, you know, does that mean the rest of the street gets the benefit of our extra 50%? Without having contributed. So, or are there latecomer agreements in this? There are? Oh, well. But still, we don't know if this is 1 year or 100 years away. Maybe somewhere in between.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of formula one might use for a partial payment. You know.
Could I ask you a follow-up question? Because in other circumstances like this, council is familiar with us asking for a 50% contribution. What would be your preference to have a 50% contribution, or to make the full contribution and get back what is not used?
Well, because of the very unknown and I think probably fairly distant into the future recovery of any unused portion, we may not be around to see it. So, you know, I was thinking that what might be really fair here, I mean, as much as we'd like to pay zero, I suppose one could say, well, if it were high density, which the OCP asked for, and we could have put 16 units on there, we're only putting 6, you know, maybe 6/16 would be a fair contribution, or 50% of 6/16. You know, those are thoughts that crossed my mind here recently.
Understand. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you. Just through you to staff, if we were to want to look at the 50% option, would that be an amendment to the motion? Because staff is recommending defeat of the motion the way it's worded. So should we defeat it and redo it if we want to look at the 50%, or should we amend the motion?
Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, that motion can be amended.
Okay. I'll wait to hear others, but I'm leaning towards amending the motion to 50%.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. And I guess the question, I know Councillor Harrison already asked it, but I wasn't sure of the answer. So latecomer agreements can be in place. That's correct?
That's correct.
Yes, Your Worship, latecomers could be charged if the work was completed.
Okay, so I agree with, you know, Mr. Hermansky's contention that they won't use, if it's upgraded, they won't use the new upgrades. But I would suggest that it would be a benefit to them in the future when new developments further along to the east are come online. So I think there is a benefit here for this project to have a larger line. And I'm certainly in favor. I listened to the discussion, excuse me, between the applicant and Councillor Harrison, and I think that a 50% payment of that would be fair. It'd be fair to the city. It'd be fair to the applicants, I think, and I think it would also be fair to the future development in that area. So I would certainly support that, and I'll make that motion.
Would you like to make that motion? Second by Councillor Flynn. So that is an amendment to the motion. Would that be what it is then? So then, speaking to the amendment, did you wish to?
Just really, I think the applicant's correct. Immediate benefit is not there. Right. I think there's a benefit coming though when the other properties develop, and it will make it's a contribution to the neighborhood, which I know they've worked hard to make sure that the neighbors are satisfied with their work. So I think it would be sort of that last stamp of approval on this project.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn, speaking to the motion.
Yeah, the amended motion, or amendment?
The amendment, sorry.
Yeah, I will vote in support of the amendment. I think the fact that our bylaw used to read 50% and was changed fairly recently supports our logic in bringing forward the motion. It's a compromise. I think the decreased density from what could be, and I think when it's interesting, we've had a lot of situations recently where significant change to an older neighborhood, and because of that, the developer went much lower densities in order for perhaps neighborhood to support it, community to support it. I think future densities could be higher once people are used to developments like this. So I think there's reasoning to go 50% as we create significant change in some of these older, more established neighborhoods. And we hear every time at this table that you're changing the fabric of the neighborhood. So I will support the 50%. I think the lower density is because it's one of the newest or first increased densities in an old area, and I feel that it's a win-win.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harrison, speaking to the amendment.
Thank you, Worship. I too will support the amendment. I think developers made a reasonable argument in that the covenant to 6 units to fit in with the community helped the community out, and they were in favor. Presently, with 6 units, it's about $20,000 per unit for off-site costs and DCCs. If you add those together and divide by 6, you get $20,000. So of course, if you had 8 units or you had 10 units, that number would be much less. So I think that's something to consider. And the other is the affordable housing piece that we talk about. It's always a balance we're trying to do here. And I know that the developers are trying to supply housing for a little lower cost. And that's been a discussion throughout the whole rezoning. And so I think it's a fair compromise going with 50%. We know that water main was put in 1951. So if we assume that nothing was done on that street, if the people weren't developing there now, the city might have to do the whole cost themselves. So I think it's a fair compromise, and 50% of 32 is about 16, which cuts the cost per unit to about $2,500. So I would support that.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will say myself too that I do feel this is a good compromise. I think the developers have worked really hard to fit into the neighborhood, and so we really appreciate that. I know the neighborhood does as well, and so and really appreciate the fact that you're trying to keep these affordable, the costs down, and we certainly need that as well. So I will support the amendment. I will call the question. All in favor of the amendment? Motion is carried, and then the motion as amended. Do we have anything further? Hearing none, I'll call the question on the motion as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, item 5.2 is Highway Closure Bylaw number 4266 for a portion of 25th Avenue Southwest. I have a motion moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that City of Salmon Arm Highway Closure Bylaw number 4266 proceed to first, second, and third reading, and that council authorize the sale of closed road, Plan EPP 81980, as shown on Appendix 3 of the staff report dated August 9th, 2018, to J&J Bickle, R&M Morgan, and S&E Taylor for the total sum of $64,000, and further that the sale of the above lands be subject to the following. Number 1, compliance with Section 26 and Section 94 of the Community Charter and Policy 3.16. Number 2, the lands being consolidated with the applicant's properties as shown on Appendix 6. And 3, all associated costs being the responsibility of the applicants.
Thank you. Development Services?
Thank you, Your Worship. The old road we're talking about was dedicated in 1968. It's approximately 1,000 square meters in area, 10 meters wide. And you can see on this aerial photo of the Ridge subdivision that there's a cul-de-sac here where 25th Avenue terminates. And in 2006, a decision was made not to extend 25th Avenue to the end here. If that decision was made that a road was needed here, then there would be no houses here because another 10 meters would have been dedicated along the north half. 2 years ago, the Bickles went through a official community plan and rezoning process. A special policy was adopted for allowing the southern portion of the road. I'll see if I got a map of that. The southern portion of the road up to the creek to be rezoned to R9, Estate Lot Residential, from one of the A zones. And on the south side of the road is the rural area. On the north side is the urban containment area. So this road represents the urban containment boundary. And council may remember that. It was just a couple of years ago that that rezoning was approved. And the southern portion of the property is hooked across the street to the Bickles property. And then last year, the Bickles approached staff with the idea of purchasing the closed road in cooperation with the neighbors to the west, the Morgans and the Taylors. And that went to council earlier this year. And an agreed upon price for the road being $64,000 was agreed to. And they applied to subdivide. The 3 owners applied to subdivide with the assumption that the road would be closed, title raised to the road, and then subdivided so that each of the 3 lots would receive a portion of the road, approximately 50% to the Bickles, 30% for Lot 2, and 20% for Lot 3. And in order to do that, a highway closure bylaw is needed to be adopted. And that's why it's here today.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and we could just leave, excuse me, leave that map. It's a question, maybe I'm the only one that's wondering, what are the, my eyes aren't working as they should, on the lowest portion there, just above where it says Section 10 on the map, Section 10, Township 20, what are those dotted lines and all those numbers? What does that represent? And that's part of their property too, correct?
Natural boundary of Hobson Creek.
Okay. And then on the other, excuse me, through Your Worship, on the other side of that line, what are those dotted lines and numbers? What does that represent?
I can answer that. Oh. So Your Worship, that's a baseline, and it basically is set up so that they can measure the boundaries of the creek. So it's really just for survey coordination. Okay.
And that's part of the property that we're...
Your Worship, that's all part of the property. It's strictly just to show the boundary of the creek.
So so if there's any change to the land there, then that's the reference point, son.
That's
Okay,
correct.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Worship. I support the motion for a couple of reasons. One, $64,000 into the city that we can use to help do some other things. I think probably the biggest concern for all of us was the greenway piece and whether that would be affected. And so the report really talks to that. I just wonder if we can look at appendix number 2. Yep, there it is. So this shows pretty well that we do not need that piece for a greenway because it dead ends, first of all, on private property, which is unlikely to be developed. Even if it was, if the trail could be extended onto Foothill Road, it really is not a useful greenway, in that it would only come up to a cul-de-sac, which you can walk to through the streets. And the access point is also not good on the top of that hill or partway down it. And of course there's Hobbs Creek on the south side, so there's not access through there. So I think the report clearly shows that it's not a piece of property that the city would use, and it's helpful to the 3 residents, plus there's a revenue source for the city. So I'll support the motion.
Thank you. Do we have anything further from council? Seeing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, item 5.3 is cannabis retail stores. Proposed policy and application procedures for cannabis retail stores. I have a motion moved by Councillor Jamieson, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that the cannabis retail stores policy number 3.20 attached to the staff report dated August 10th, 2018 be adopted, and that a bylaw be prepared for Council's consideration, adoption of which would amend Schedule B of the Fee-for-Service Bylaw number 2498, business license fees for business categories and fees payable for the licensing period, add cannabis retail processing fee, add fee of $1,000.
Development Services?
Your Worship, this report and proposed policy stems from the report I furnished for you back in March, talking about various options that council could consider for regulating cannabis retail sales in the city. And after that report was presented to you in March, extensive public consultation occurred over a period of about 5 weeks, including an open house. It was actually a special council meeting. And all the input received is attached as Appendix 3 to the report. I think it's fair to say that Council was comfortable with the moderately regulated approach, which would involve no amendments to our zoning bylaw. And with the moderately regulated approach, a cannabis retail store would be considered a retail store in the zoning bylaw, and it would be permitted in a number of commercial zones. And with that, the province has come out with the way they're going to deal with provincial licenses. And the province, through its liquor cannabis control or retail board, regulation branch, sorry, liquor and cannabis regulation branch, has come up with the methods for obtaining a provincial license application through its electronic portal system. And once they receive an application, they refer it out to the municipality involved. And the policy created, drafted up, talks about what I envision seeing happening when the city receives an application. It's very similar to when we receive a liquor license application. The big difference is there'll be a public process involved, similar to a hearing for a development permit or a temporary use permit. More like a temporary use permit, because there'll be an ad in the newspaper, one ad in the Salmon Arm Observer, and all properties within 30 meters of the proposed retail outlet will receive notification of the hearing day. And the policy is fairly simple. There's a location preference criteria, which discourages any cannabis retail store to be located 500 meters from a school. Based on the comments I received comments from most of you at different points of time. Some of you were concerned about the number of stores in the downtown, so there's a policy saying no more than 4 cannabis retail stores in the core commercial area, and the core commercial area is delineated on map 1A of the policy. And cannabis retail stores should not be located within a building containing residential units. With all these location criteria, at the end of the day, and despite the zoning of the property, council still has to make a decision whether to support a store or not. So what would happen is the provincial license would come through to the city. Staff would prepare a report indicating if the proposal meets the policy or not. Would talk about the zoning of the property. And basically it would be a council resolution whether to support the store or not. And that resolution would be sent back to the province, similar to a ALC application. And we will be receiving applications soon. I've spoken to a provincial rep last week, and it's coming. It's coming soon. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but if you have or if have not, I'm here to answer questions.
Thank you, and yes, I think we've all taken time to read it for sure, although it was a busy weekend. But I want to thank you for all the work that you've done on this, as you do on all the applications, and you're going to have a lot more work coming forward with this, so I appreciate the work that you've done. I will open it up for council. I'm wondering just, are we going to be publishing this or putting it on our website and letting people have a look at it and make note of it? I'm assuming it comes back to council next Monday, is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship. This report and policy and proposed bylaw amendment would come back on August 27th. And I just actually I didn't really speak about the fee idea. A normal business license fee for a retail store ranges between $200 and $400 per year, depending on the floor space of the store. So that would still be paid. The proposed fee in the motion for the $1,000 non-refundable processing fee, that is to cover the cost of advertisement in the newspaper and the staff time involved with processing the report. And we really should have something similar to this for liquor licenses, but we don't right now. So anyways, back to your question, Your Worship. It will be on the agenda next Monday at the council meeting in the afternoon. And we can put this on our website.
Okay, I think that would be a great idea. Thank you. So, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. Could we go to the 2 maps, just so I'm clear? So that map is probably the best one. And this doesn't include the commercial area at the top of the hill in this map, but I'm assuming that would be indicated as pink as well?
That's right, Your Worship. That pink area east of the town center designated in the OCP as highway commercial, that was omitted from the policy because all of that land is within 500 meters of a school.
Okay.
However, if I may continue, if an application were, for example, to come in for a property up there, it would still go to council, and council could still support it.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, the green area in this map is the area that's restricted to 4, but under the current bylaw, technically, right outside on the west side of the green line, you could have 4 in that block based on the way the bylaw is written. Is that correct?
The policy supports 4 stores within the green area,
right?
and then beyond the green area, there's no limit.
Yeah, so, okay. I'm not sure, I need more time to think about what the policy is proposing, and I'm glad we have a week, but I see that as a problem, that the rules are for that green core, and then there's no rules further down. And obviously on First Nations land and regional district land, there's no rules that we know of as well. So I know we're maybe trying to solve the issue with our downtown core or that core, but in absence of any rules elsewhere, I'm not sure we should have the limit of 4 in the downtown core. But I really do appreciate staff's work. I'm not sure where I stand on either that or the $1,000, because it seems like we're discriminating, although we know there are additional costs. So I just think if we're going to have those additional costs, they should probably apply to liquor as well, as you've mentioned. So thanks for the report. I'm going to have some time to think about it, but I am not sure I'm in favor at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Your Worship. I too would like to thank staff. I think they've done a particularly good job, not just in writing the bylaw, but in the consultation piece. And I think council as well. We've had lots of opportunity to hear from people. There's been opportunity for all the business organizations to supply information and their thoughts. But the chamber survey I found really useful, and all of our public sessions. So I think the bylaw really encompasses exactly what we heard, in my view. I think it's a common sense policy. I think it's based on public input and also on the knowledge of experiences of other jurisdictions. The majority of the people that we've heard from support the moderately regulated process that we are following. And throughout all the input we've heard, and including this written input, many refer to, say, handle it the same way that you handle liquor outlets. There's lots of reference to that. And of course, we know that the only difference between liquor outlets and cannabis outlets is that we make the decision on the cannabis outlets, and the liquor outlets are decided provincially. So I saw that throughout input that we received, and that's certainly the route that I think we should follow as well. I support the 500 meters from schools, and that's pretty consistent throughout almost all of the input that we've had. I also support the maximum of 4 cannabis outlets within the core commercial area, within the green area. I think it's a really good way that staff has solved several problems. When we talked about should there be a distance between cannabis retail outlet stores themselves, and by doing that, it's extremely complicated and difficult to manage. We know that other cities that have moved forward either voluntarily or been forced to move forward on this prior to legislation, cities like Nelson, found that they had to cap the number of retail outlets because they ended up with many, many outlets. And I know that the city of Nelson did cap their downtown number at 4 as well. So I support that. There is, of course, some discretion for council, but I think as a policy, I think it would be useful to have that in there. And that negates the need to have any minimum distance between stores. I also support the processing fee of $1,000. I think it's reasonable. I think it's what our costs are. And I do not think that taxpayers should have to subsidize the fees that the city needs to pay in order to go through these applications. So I do support that piece as well. The only piece that we did hear that's not included in in this is, should there be a distance from outlets like Canadian Mental Health and those kind of outlets? So I'd be interested to hear what council and then staff have to say. I know it complicates things whenever you require a distance, especially within the downtown core, because the core is small. But maybe there's a solution or a number that might work. So overall, I certainly support the policy and will support the motion here. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there a reason why we didn't put something in again about health, a distance from health centers like the Canadian Mental Health Association?
Your worship, I didn't include anything like daycares, adult daycares, child daycares, Canadian Mental Health Association. I think those type of things could be taken into consideration by council on a per application basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the comments, and thank you for a really good report too, easy to digest. It looked, when I picked it up last week and I looked at it, oh my, it's very thick, and of course most of it is responses from the one survey. I had a couple of questions, but I'm kind of in between Councillor Harrison's thinking and Councillor Flynn's. I'm going to read it over again, and I'm satisfied with the guts of the report. I really am. I have a few questions, and maybe I could ask those today, and that'll help my thinking during the next week. So just so the process, so the application goes to the provincial agency first, and so they queue the applications to the city then. So we're not having to say, well, look at that one first and that one first or that one first. We will decide, or pardon me, the provincial government will decide the application queue, who gets consideration first by the city. Is that correct?
That's what I'm hoping, Your Worship. We're not going to be accepting business license applications until we receive the provincial application.
Okay, I too hope that's the way it is too, so that the applications come to us in the order that they go to the provincial agency, and not us deciding arbitrarily or politically who should receive the first license or the second license or the third license. So, okay. What about the current locations? Could I have a comment on that, Your Worship? Just like the current locations, they'll have to apply? Is it very likely then the retail outlets that are in Salmon Arm right now will have to close shop and then reapply? Do you see that happening, Your Worship?
Your Worship, I'm going to leave that up to the province to make a decision on those ones that are operating illegally. They're the primary licensing agency involved with this. It'd be like somebody opening up a liquor store that's not licensed by the province, and it wouldn't be the city dealing with the enforcement of that.
Okay, good. Another question, Your Worship. So, in your opinion then, if a shop or shops open, and then in the future, another agency or another building is constructed that would put the retail in contravention, and I'm just going to use an example. What if a new school were built in the downtown, and it was within in that distance that we would suggest is not appropriate? Would that again come back to us for redecision on that, or I'd like a comment on that too.
Development Services?
We'd have to say no to the school. It would be a non-conforming situation in terms of non-conforming to the policy, but you could not backtrack on the outlet.
Okay, good. And there's a recommendation that there wouldn't be residential units in the same building, and we'll hold on that one, right? That's our decision?
That's proposed in the policy.
Yeah, that is clearly our decision and not anyone else's, if it has to be a standalone structure, correct?
Well, the policy says that a cannabis retail store should should not be in the same building as residential units. But like any application that comes forward, if a case is made to locate it in a building with residential units, and the residences are all fine with it, and they come out to the hearing and say, yeah, we want the store in this building, council can still say yes to it.
Okay, or no.
Or no.
Okay. But good report, though. As usual, it's easy to understand, and like I said before, the guts of the report are what residents told us and commercial operators in town, and I think it reflects the comments of council, and I know that we've spoken and gone back and forth on this, and a lot of council has, so I appreciate the report, and another week to consider. I don't anticipate any great changes. I like a lot of what's here, so we'll talk next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Lavery?
Thank you, Mayor Cooper. And like others, I think it's a straightforward report, but it's very elegant as well. And I think a lot of thought has gone into that, and I think I like that. I have some general comments, question for staff, Your Worship, and then some comments on location preference criteria. In terms of the business license one, I think that this is a cost recovery basis proposal. I think I'm absolutely fine with that. The most other jurisdictions that I've looked at, they're putting a significant increase on the business license for cannabis-related stores. We heard loud and clear, I think, that it should be the same as others. This does that, and but at no extra cost to us, so I'm supportive of that part of it. I was not an original capping the amount person. Looking around, and I'm aware of the Nelson situation. I think that we heard about thresholds between retail stores. I think this, and to let the market decide, I think this does, and again, I would use the word elegant. I think it's a capping, especially in that core area, that I am comfortable with, so I'll support that. Mayor Cooper, through you to staff, a question. We have a situation now where we have business licenses, and I don't want to look backwards, but I want to use this to look forwards. We have business licenses that say you're not allowed to retail cannabis, and it's happening. I understand that provincial and government legislation and hopefully provincial enforcement will clear a lot of that off. My question is, both federally and provincially, they refer to this as non-medical cannabis retail. And so my question through Your Worship to staff is, in our bylaw, is it better or is it possible, or what are staff's thoughts of actually, rather than saying, and I'm just looking for the policy here, we say retail sale of cannabis, can we say retail sale of non-medical cannabis or non-cannabis retail? Because I don't believe that this gap of medical versus non-medical is resolved yet. And I do believe that a number of businesses have been pushing the envelope. We could have the discussion whether that's good or bad or right or wrong and stuff like that. But I'm really interested, I don't want us to be in a situation right now, as things are clarified, as enforcement is clarified, that we have situations where somebody is also doing medical, which falls under a different regime and regulation. So I guess my question again, Mayor Cooper, through you to staff is, would it be advisable to consider wherever we say retail cannabis to actually specify what is the law, which is non-medical cannabis retail?
Thoughts on that, Development Services?
Your Worship, we could put another statement under Section B General to say that the terms cannabis retail store refers to non-medical cannabis retail stores throughout this policy.
Your Worship, I'd like to hear others' thoughts on that as well as staff, and I think we have a bit of time, to consider that. But I think clarity is important here, and to my mind, to my non-legal mind, that would do it. In terms of clarity, and this is sort of think my second last point here. I really like the location preference criteria, and I think that's part of the elegance of this all. I know other jurisdictions are being very specific in their bylaws about this sort of thing. This is a statement of clarity for prospective applicants, for citizens, and for council to consider things, but permitting some variance. So I really like that, and again, that's for me the elegant part of it. If we could turn to page, I think it's 37 of our report, and it's under the section of location preference criteria. And the second last statement about 500 meters of a school. I know that is, again, an elegant way of looking at uptown and going from there. I'm fine with 500 meters. I personally have a preference for 200 or 300 meters because I think that encapsulates it, but I also get that it's called preference. So I'm comfortable with that. What I would like to see in there is a statement, and again, I'd like to hear others' thoughts on that. I would probably make it as an amendment at an appropriate time, Your Worship, but that we, but not right at this stage, that we say schools, parks, and community centers. And my last question, and that's not directly related to this, but do we have a sense through you, Your Worship, to staff, whether there's going to be a government application for a cannabis retail? Do we have any sense of that in our discussion with the province?
Development Services?
Your Worship, I'd like to address first the idea of parks. If we include parks into that preference, then this whole map is going to have to be changed. And the commercial core will have to be looked at again. So if we're going to go there, I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board of this map. I'm just letting you know that. And as far as talking with the province for a government-run store, yes, I have been speaking with the province on that.
Okay.
If I could.
Thank you for that. Did you want to continue,
Yeah,
Councilor?
just and thanks to staff for that. And I'll just start off with speaking about it. Do we have a sense that there is a government application coming, an application for a government retail store coming to Salmon Arm?
They're looking at Salmon Arm.
Thank you very much. Back to the parks thing, and I again, I think the elegance. I like the cap of the 4, but by putting parks in there, does that not become a preference criteria that would not mandate a redrawing of the maps that we have? And I guess again I'm looking for the director's sense of that. I understand if it was a really strict, as other jurisdictions are doing, criteria A, B, C, D, E down the line. But again, it comes under preference criteria here. And I can personally say that if it's Marine Park or McGuire Lake, if a new school is being built in the Blackburn Park area or wherever, that becomes a preference of council and a decision of council. So is a requirement to redraw things completely required, seeing as how it's in preference?
Development Services?
Perhaps not, but I mean, if you look at this map here, the area in green is seen as a preferred location in general. So if you added the park proximity, just like if you added the Canadian Mental Health Association office, I think it could muddy it up, personally, but it's council's call if they want that.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate those ideas. I'd like to hear others more, but I certainly am thinking of at some point down the line making that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. just to the point about the parks and community centers, I feel that the public's concern was consumption of in parks and around community centers, and the no smoking bylaw addresses that. I don't personally have a concern with a retail outlet being close to a park that may or may not sell cannabis. So we have to be mindful of what the public said to us, which is we should stay out of moderately regulated, let the market decide, and do what we can to address concerns about the consumption piece. And then my next question would be the idea of and this might be just at the province, but I foresee a time where a coffee shop will sell cannabis products, and I'm just wondering if that's being addressed at the provincial level, and if not, is there enough flexibility in this bylaw to address that?
Development Services, any thoughts on that?
Your worship, as far as I know now, the province has no intentions to allow the sale of retail cannabis, non-medical cannabis in coffee shops. Okay. Only through licensed outlets that can't sell any other product, from what I understand. Okay. And they don't allow consumption either in the premises. Right, and so to me there's a bit of a hole there on the provincial level, because the whole point of the liquor store is the consumption of liquor. So you can consume liquor in some places that are not liquor stores. It's inevitable that people will want to consume cannabis in places that aren't cannabis retail stores. So, but that's not for today's mountain to climb. But generally, I would say I'm very pleased with the rule. My big concern really is from the perspective of what's happening now and how we're going to integrate that non-medical medical issue. I think there's some big players in the market, and we'll need to just follow the province's lead very carefully on that.
Okay, just on the thought of no smoking, we do say no smoking. Are we going to have to change our no smoking sign to include no smoking of tobacco, cannabis, or no vaping as well?
I'm not sure about vaping,
Okay.
Your Worship, but
Anyway.
the definition in the smoking bylaw would cover off cannabis.
Okay, thank you. That's a question I've heard. Yeah. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your Worship. I did have a question. In the bylaw, it specifically speaks to the area in Canoe that has retail. I don't see any reference to the area around Meller's store where I could see potential desire to put a retail outlet, and I'm not sure how close that is to.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's just outside, okay.
Yeah.
That's, okay. Okay, then that's, I guess that's another, yeah, I that's why it's not in there. That would explain it. For some reason, I thought that was within our boundaries, but now I remember that it's not, so. My other question was, with regards to the not wanting to have residential in the same building, everything we're trying to do downtown is trying to encourage mixed retail with residential above. That seems extremely counterproductive to, I mean, a perfect example is the new building beside the CSRD building that's going to be mixed use, commercial, residential, perhaps some retail. Is that, again, is that just a guideline and a preference, and that's how it's worded, or is that an outright, you cannot be in a building that has residential above or as part of the use?
It's just a guideline, Your Worship.
Okay.
And the reason I put that in there is because if you had if you had a building with 4 units, upper floor dwelling units, and the notification went out and everybody was just adamantly opposed to this shop going in there, then council would have it written in policy that it's not encouraged, and it would give you more ammunition to say no.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anything further from council? I know this has been, there's a lot of discussion around this. We've spent a lot of time on it, and we appreciate the report that has come back from council. Some of us may have some thoughts, further thoughts at the next, at the council meeting. But for now, I don't see anything further. So you need a motion to pass this forward, move this forward, and it's there, right? So then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, we have a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of August 20th, 2018 be adjourned.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
I'm just asking, okay, so the medicinal